we have a story to tell. It's an opportunity for us to share our culture, about who we really are.
Everybody in the world has an Aboriginal past, but they're so far removed from it from thousands of years of separation.
It is a great responsibility, I believe, to present my culture in the most honest and historically accurate way possible, because I might be the only one that they ever meet.
They need to leave and to say, without them, we would not know Canada as it is today.
They want to beat the drum, they want to dance the dance and feel it in the heart and be able to remember it forever, because once you hear the beat of the drum, you'll never forget it.
Growing up, my grandma always told me that the land took care of us, and it still is taking care of us, and it never asked for anything back.
It is a way of life to always honor the environment. It's not something that you just can turn on and off. It's a living, daily lifestyle.
And that acknowledgement is a way to acknowledge that we're coexisting in this land with the native people, and we should acknowledge that this is actually their traditional territory. But at the same time, we are all guests to this land.
The land plays a big factor in who we are. That's what makes us strong. That's what makes us strong people.
Welcome to the Summit Trails Truth and Reconciliation presentation. My name is David Smith, Principal, and I would like to welcome all Summit Trails students and staff. We welcome Discovery Trails students as well as Building Future students. We thank you for the trustees as well as Associate Superintendent and Area Directors who have joined us today. Students, today you're going to hear what has been created from your peers as we reflect on and for the National Truth and Reconciliation Day. Last year we spoke about history and we looked into culture. This year we're going to look at the why. With that in mind, I hand it over to the students.
In your early school years, you may have made mini teepees or created a presentation on a specific Indigenous group. We learned about how they helped establish this country, of their dances, ceremonies, and maybe witnessed one from a guest speaker. Think about the time you were first taught of the residential schools. How old were you, and how were you told? It could be as early as grade 3 or as late as grade 7. Do you remember when celebrating art and culture was replaced with the truth?
This is a poem, A Step in Blackfoot, that I wrote. I hope you guys enjoy it. Years and years in uniforms that were not of what they called theirs. Shut off who you are, but be as they say you are. Coming in with steps of Blackfoot, proud of where they stand now. New people say they are the founders of the true First Nations land. From hurt and abuse of broken culture, we are just realizing the damage that will last forever. To come out and stand true is to start to re-glue. May today and every day be to say thank you to the tribes who found the land. We will ever be sorry to how we reprimand, never again. Now, in step of reconciliation towards a better land, let's not forget that they found our land. They are not only a part of our history, we are a part of theirs. May Niitsitapi stand.
National Truth and Reconciliation Day beckons us to contemplate the stark contrast between what we learned as children and the profound awareness we now hold, even as the current news makes this journey challenging to navigate. The truths we uncover about Canada's history and the experiences of Indigenous people may be disheartening, unsettling, and at times difficult to read and digest. Yet, it is precisely during these challenging moments that we must not look away, but instead redouble our efforts to educate ourselves, engage with uncomfortable narratives, and seek out diverse perspectives. Only by confronting these truths head-on can we work on towards genuine reconciliation and a more just and inclusive future for all.
Over the years, we have become more informed on residential schools and the trauma that came with them. One new thing a lot of people were educated about is generational trauma. The following video speaks about generational trauma from two different perspectives, helping to educate us further on the lasting impact of residential schools and how they continue to affect lives today.
I was born on the Piikani First Nation. My grandmother looked after me and taught me language. She taught me who I was. She taught me who Creator was.
Métis tradition and culture has been a part of my life since I was born. Also, the Cree tradition I was also born into.
My grandmother took me to a group of children that were brought together, and they were called the Little Birds. The free will that I had at the time allowed me to enjoy and build up my passion for education and learning. And that free will helped me to give me an identity that I was proud of, and to know my language, my culture, and who I was.
I was adopted as a young kid. I was adopted into a traditional Cree family, and they brought me into the Sweat Lodge, healed me, and you know, I owe my life to the Sweat Lodge.
I was about 5 years old when I was brought to residential school. My grandmother in our language told me that I was gonna go have an education. But then she said, Kiakutupi. Kiakutupi means you're gonna go and live in education. So that was puzzling.
I never learned about residential school until my early 20s. And it really opened my mind up to the way my parents live, their behaviors, the way they're conditioned, and how I was treated because of what they went through.
The teacher came along and asked me my name. I said, Awakasina, and that was my name, Dear Chief, Awakasina. And all I heard was a smack, and all these feelings came out. I thought, whoa, guilt, shame, embarrassment.
It wasn't until my later years I was briefed on the history of my people and what they went through, and you find some truths that are hard to swallow.
So that's the day I realized I put my grandmother, my family, my language, my oral systems, Creator, I locked them all in my head and didn't say anything anymore.
What really happened to our culture? And what are we doing to preserve it?
Assimilation started, a transformation by conforming. I spent my 9 years at residential school. That education wasn't free will. That education was fear.
I never realized how much people it affected until people actually said, hey, it happened to me too.
The main memory I got from residential school was learning how to read and write and speak English. But, and surviving and living in an institution rather than a home.
The impact is heavy. There's a lot of residual energy. There's a lot of grief.
Traumas are feelings, and when those feelings hit, You might want to do the right thing, but when a trauma hits that has feeling, it makes you do the wrong thing automatically. Like, I know I should hug my kids, but to hug them, trauma hits me that abuse is going to happen. So to protect them, I wouldn't hug them. There was a lot of people, and including myself and my wife, we got married. And as we had kids, we had no examples of parenting because we grew up in the institution.
These parents never got the chance to be parents. So when they get their kids back, it's a little different, right? And then the kid that got taken away and put back into his family, now he's set in a world of confusion, clash of worlds, and then, you know, the cycle continues.
Traumas came with anger. I drank and I fought, and I was doing all the things to deal with that trauma, that anger, but yet I was doing the wrong thing. And my son seen me doing that.
Something I wish I learned a little earlier in my life, because I think I would have understood people a little more, especially my parents.
But I would never tell my kids because I felt that they might make them angry.
It was almost like they were trying to save me from the idea of how terrible it was. I am the way I am because of intergenerational trauma. To have that refreshment of, you know, this happens not only to me, but to a lot of people.
My culture wasn't accepted. It was driven out of me at residential school, and I had to embrace a new way of life. So what do? Do I go back to my culture? Will I be accepted in society if I use it?
My culture and my tradition really helped me get back to who I am.
My dad and my mother and my grandmother brought me back to the smudge. What opened my mind to who I was and my going back to my identity, because I went through those 9 years of trauma and change in paradigm.
I know who I am when I'm in the sweat lodge. I know who I am when I'm dancing. These are the things where I found myself.
Our young people today, for example, like Johnny's case, did suffer from that intergeneration trauma.
When I learned about residential schools and how it impacted my family and my parents, and then realizing that residual anger and frustrations were passed on to me conditionally, and then to keep that circle going on with my daughter, it was very eye-opening. It put a lot of responsibility on my shoulders, for sure, because now I know. Now I could start to transition to who I really want to be for my child.
Stories as knowledge containers are just as important as textbooks for theories. Elders are so important as validated instructors and teachers to teach those stories. We need to look at the oral system in parallel to access and harvest knowledge in a proper way so we can use it for resilience for our young people, rather than locking out the stories, locking out the elders, and then expropriating from the default system just to enhance written programs and written systems. We keep doing that, we're going to take resiliency away.
That resilience is a big one, because when I am in ceremony or when I'm in front of them and I get to talk to them, there is no hurt.
We need to accommodate to smudge the circle, the elders, and protect it through our policies so we can build knowledge capacity and human capacity to help our young people detoxify from the default system we live in today.
The National Day for Truth and Reconciliation is a federally recognized statutory day of observance in Canada that occurs annually on September 30th. It is meant to be a day to build understanding and reflect on the history and ongoing events of the residential school system. It provides an opportunity for Canadians to honor and remember the survivors of residential schools, as well as the children who did not survive it. It also serves as a time for learning about the experience of Indigenous peoples. The National Day for Truth and Reconciliation was established in response to one of the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. The TRC was formed to address the legacy of residential schools and to document the stories of survivors. We'd now like to introduce Mr. Rogers, principal of Discovery Trails Online School, to read the Orange Shirt Day story.
Good morning and thank you. So I'm going to read the Orange Shirt Story, which is a true story of Phyllis Webstad with the beautiful illustrations by Brock Nickel. I'd like to point out that although this is a picture book, it is not a children's book, which is to say it is indeed for children, but it is also for teenagers and adults. It is for everybody. So please listen to the words that Phyllis herself wrote about her time in residential school. When Phyllis was a little girl, she lived with her granny on the Dog Creek Reserve, part of the Swicomic Zatem First Nation. Their home had no electricity and no indoor toilet. In the summer, when the sun was hot, Phyllis would cool herself off in the bathtub full of water that Granny kept in her garden. Growing up, Phyllis felt lonely. There weren't many children on the reserve to play with. Each September, all the older children, like her cousin, would leave the reservation to go to school. Phyllis looked forward to the day that she could go too. When Phyllis turned 6, Granny made her a cake to celebrate her birthday. Granny told Phyllis, now that she was 6, she was old enough to go to school. When September came, she would go to the residential school, St. Joseph's Mission, for the first time. Before her first day at school, Granny took Phyllis into town to buy her a new shirt. They didn't have a car or a truck, so when they went into town, they would take a big blue bus they called the stage. After breakfast, Granny took Phyllis to a shop that was filled with clothes and toys. Phyllis picked out a shiny orange shirt that laced down the front. It was bright and exciting. She felt as excited about the shirt as she did about going to school. Granny bought the shirt and they got back on the stage and went home. Phyllis held the bag with her orange shirt in it all the way. She promised herself that she wouldn't wear it until the big day when she went to school. Phyllis waited and waited, and finally the day arrived. Phyllis, wearing her shiny orange shirt for the first time, said goodbye to Granny. Granny patted her on the head and said, "What loves it?" Phyllis got on the stage with all the other children and waved at Granny from the window. It was a 2-hour journey to get to the residential school, much farther than Phyllis had ever traveled before. She stared out the window, waiting to see the place where they were going. When they arrived, Phyllis started to feel very scared. The residential school was so much taller than anything she had seen before. The building seemed cold and unfriendly as the nuns who came out of the school to meet them. The nuns took all the children inside and walked them down a long hallway in single file. In a room, the children were undressed and made to take a shower. Phyllis had never seen water coming out of the walls before. Phyllis didn't want to take off her shiny orange shirt, but the nuns made her. After she had showered, They gave her different clothes to wear. She didn't like them. The nuns put Phyllis in a chair and cut her hair short. She asked for her orange shirt back, but they told her she wouldn't be allowed to wear it anymore. Phyllis cried, "Give it back! It's not yours, it's mine! My granny bought it for me!" But no one would listen. The residential school wasn't where Phyllis learned. It was the place where the children slept and ate. Phyllis soon realized that the nuns didn't care if she was tired, sick, hungry, or sad. She had to rely on herself. It felt as though she didn't matter. At dinner time, Phyllis and the other children would eat tasteless and almost colorless food. At school, Phyllis learned to read and write with the other boys and girls, but she was still lonely. All the children from the residential school were lonely because they had been taken away from their homes and their families. Phyllis liked her teacher, but she was no substitute for Granny. She wondered what Granny was doing while Phyllis went to school every day. Phyllis missed her home and her garden. The seasons changed, from fall to winter, then to spring, and finally it was summer again. Phyllis was excited about going home. She never wanted to go back to the residential school or see the cold-hearted nuns ever again. After 300 sleeps, the stage came and took Phyllis back home to the reserve. She was so happy to be back to a place where she mattered, a place where people cared about her. That summer, she stayed at home with her granny. She stayed in her family house and worked with Granny in the garden. She went fishing for salmon in the Fraser River, and she ate them for dinner. She had everything she needed, and she never went back to residential school again. Not every child was as lucky as Phyllis. The end. Phyllis's true story is only one among many. We must listen to these stories and we must learn from our past. By doing so, we can walk into the future without making the same mistakes again. When we wear orange shirts on Orange Shirt Day, we reaffirm that every child matters. The children from every nation around the world, the residential school survivors, and the First Nations children who didn't come home.
Everyone has a need to belong, to someone, to some place, to something. April Rain Tree is about that need. It's about to know where you come from, where you're going, and why you're here, and who you are, the most basic questions of life. It's a fictionalized story about real events, about governments removed Indigenous children from their parents and families and communities. The resources of the answers to the sources of those answers to all those questions is the sole purpose for making them believe in another set of answers. And it is about how one young, heroic girl fights against all odds to find those answers for herself. The telling of the story is a wake-up call to the need for Indigenous children to feel value and validity in their sense of identity. It's about what happens to those who can't. There's sadness buried between the lines, and yet it's a story of resilience, of healing and triumph. Every child should read this. That was a quote by Senator Murray Sinclair, former chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada.
Reconciliation doesn't have an endpoint, and we encourage you to reflect on what you heard today and, if possible, to learn more. We hope you could take something away from this presentation and that you deepened your understanding of residential schools and the struggles Indigenous people faced and continue to face. To finish up this presentation, we would like to give a big thank you to everyone who took the time to come today. Reconciliation is a group effort, and showing up and learning more is extremely important. Thank you to all students, and have a great rest of your day.